If you have or want to have an RV or van, even if it's one that's right off the lot, you need a more complex understanding of electrical systems than if you're in a sticks and bricks. And if you want to be off grid, you need to understand solar systems and how it all works together, even if you aren't building a rig yourself. But this can be a hard topic for a lot of us to understand. Welcome to the live stream. I'm Joni Zander, content creator and road guide here at TheGalavan. I help women get on the road and become successful nomads. Tonight, I'm happy to have my friend Cass from Tales of Wanderlust join me to explain basics electrical and solar systems in a way everyone can understand. In the past year or so, Cass has done 2 full truck camper remodels, including upgrading her electrical and solar systems. If you have questions as we go along, go ahead and put them in the chat, starting with a question mark, and we'll answer as we go along, as well as having a Q&A at the end. And women, make sure you put our first Thursday discussions on your calendar. These happen after the live stream on the first Thursday of the month to deep dive into the topics we've been covering and get your personal nomadic questions answered. You can grab the link in our Facebook group, Gal Adventures. All right. So, Cass, thanks so much for joining me here. I know a lot of women in my community are very excited to learn more about this topic.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Joni. I'm really excited to be here and go through everything as is normal with internet. If my internet comes in and out, let me know. Bouncing between different hotspots. So nomad life. But today what I want to go through is just the high level of electrical systems in RVs. There's a lot of terminology, especially that people will throw out at you. I know myself, I went into an Airstream dealer, asked them a couple of questions about lithium. The price they gave me to install it was about a 400% markup, and the technology and the terminology they use was really confusing. So the goal of today is to just go through a high level of what everything is. That way, if you want to work with an installer, start digging into this, you have some idea of where to start. And then I'll also give you the resource at the end that I've used to do the wiring in both of the truck campers that I have rebuilt. So perfect. Okay, with that, let me go ahead and jump right in. So I'm going to start at the top with the difference between AC and DC power. So this is a terminology you're going to have thrown around a lot, and it also depends on how you end up building out your rig. So AC power is called alternating current. So think if you have a house, everything in your house is AC. So when you go to plug your camper into shore power or your RV campsite, that's all AC power. So that's your standard electrical that you're used to. Here in campers and boats and things like that run off batteries, you end up running into DC power or direct current. How I always tell myself is it's direct from the battery. That's how I remember it. So a direct current is when everything is running off the battery. So think about doing like an off-grid setup. You're out in the middle of nowhere camping, you're charging off solar, you're running everything off of your battery via DC power. Now, the thing is, not every appliance works off DC or AC, and it's usually one or the other. You usually don't have appliances that work for both. So the unique thing about RVs is you've got to have both AC and DC power, which is where a lot of the complexity, if you want to say, to an RV electrical system comes in. So with that, I'll kind of jump into the batteries. Kind of the heart of your electrical system in an RV is your batteries and where you're going to store that power. And then we'll get to how you charge those batteries, and we'll come back around to the whole AC, DC electrical item. So with batteries, there's a few different batteries that you can run into in an RV. And everyone has their pros and cons. You have the 3 most common types are lead acid batteries, AGM batteries, and lithium batteries. I personally run off lithium batteries because I used to have AGM batteries. I did not know that lead acid and AGM batteries, you can only use 50%. So when you look at your battery monitor and you see that your battery is coming down to 60, 50%, you better get it charged back up soon, because as you go below 50%, you start damaging it. So I purchased myself a brand new Airstream. I had these 2 great AGM batteries in it. Did not know the 50% rule. Ran them down to 0% all the time because I work a full-time remote job. And I destroyed those batteries in about 6 months. So the 50% rule is really important for the AGM and the lead acid batteries. It does not apply to lithium, which is actually one of the reasons that I've converted and switched over to lithium. So looking at those 3 battery types, I want to talk about lead acid and AGM first. So they are, for the most part, the typical battery that you're going to get in a camper. Nowadays, in the last few years, some manufacturers have started using lithium right off the bat. So that is something to ask as you're looking to purchase which system you have in there. Each battery type actually requires its own type of charger because you can't use the same charger on a lithium necessarily as on an AGM. So it's not as easy as just saying, hey, I've got a camper with lead acid AGM batteries, let me drop in lithium. Sometimes it is, but not always. So hopefully this will give you the information to ask and make sure you have the right stuff. So what are some of the big differences between the two? So one is that capacity. Lead acid and AGM don't go below 50%. With lithium batteries, you can actually use the whole entire battery. So you can go from 100 down to 0 and back up. The other thing is charging. Lead acid and AGM batteries like to be used and then fully recharged and then used and fully recharged. When you're working off solar, you might have a day where you've got 2 hours of sun and you can't fully recharge the battery. Lithium batteries allow you to do a little bit of charging, use, a little bit of charging, use without damaging it. So that's a big difference between the two. Another difference is freezing temperatures. So if you do a lot of winter camping, lithium batteries, you can use them at any temperature, but you can't charge them below freezing. So I myself do a lot of skiing. So I actually have a heated lithium battery. So if it's below 0, I actually flip this little switch right here and I turn on the heater on my battery. You can also put it inside your cabin so that you have heat. But lithium batteries can't necessarily go outside in a compartment like an AGM can because it does have to have the heat for the winter. So something to keep in mind there. And then the big thing is cost. So a lead acid is cheaper than an AGM, and then an AGM is cheaper than a lithium. You can get a lead acid AGM battery, depending on the brand and all of that, between like $100 and $300. A lithium is going to be upwards of $700, $800, $900, depending on which brand you go with. So there is a huge cost difference there, but the AGM batteries, remember, you can only use 50%-ish. So batteries are measured in what's called amp hours. So if you have 100 amp hours of AGM or lead acid batteries, it's really the same as 50 amp hours of lithium. So that's also something to keep in mind when you're looking at the size of a battery bank. Is the lead acid and AGM batteries, you actually need a slightly larger bank because you can't use the full battery like you can on a lithium. So you actually have to buy twice as many of those as you do lithium. So take that into account when you're doing the cost. And then also age. So the AGM battery, if you use it like I did, it lasts 6 months. But if you use it properly, it can last longer than that. And then the lithium batteries, they can go for 5,000 cycles. A cycle is you using it and charging it. So that's 5,000 charges, where an AGM is in the hundreds. So it's a huge difference in terms of lifespan of the batteries. So a lot of places, lithium is like the big buzzword nowadays. You go in, hey, everybody, let's buy lithium. I love lithium. I use Battleborn, and I am a huge fan. But I wouldn't recommend it for everybody because there is the cost behind it. So think about what your use is, and don't necessarily let somebody convince you to go to the higher end just because it's the cool thing to do. So some of the things that I put into my thought process as I was converting, I was living in RVs full-time. I work a full-time remote job. I rely on my batteries. If they fail and I can't log into work, I'm going to be in big trouble at work. If I was just camping on the weekends, doing part-time, not working from the road, the power isn't as big of a deal because if I lose power, I'll just drive to an RV park and charge. I don't have to be 100% reliant on it. I'm also a big boondocker. So I like to drive in the middle of nowhere and stay there for weeks on end. You can't go from 20 miles down a dirt road, rush to an RV park to charge. It's going to take me like 2 hours to do that. So for me, being that remote, I want to have something a lot more reliable and that's going to support everything. So for me, it was worth it, but it's not necessarily worth it for everybody. So keep that in mind when you're going through. I'll pause
Right.
there. Any initial questions or anything you want to add, Joni?
I don't see any questions, but I do have some thoughts to add. So on the charging, one thing I didn't know when I upgraded from AGM to lithium was the lithiums don't take as much. Um, they're easier to charge. They take a charge easier. So like I didn't upgrade my solar, but I was able to charge faster because they just suck up the energy. They also, when they're charging while I'm driving, which I know you're gonna talk about, the ways that you charge your batteries, um, I didn't have to drive as far to charge the lithium. A lot of my community are van lifers, and so the size difference and the weight difference can be a really big deal. And if you're going to have your rig for a long time, lithium is actually cheaper in the long run than the others because of the long life. You're not going to be replacing them all the time. So those are just a couple of other things that I thought of when I
Thank
was
you.
making my decision to upgrade.
And it's great to hear the decisions either way. I completely agree with you. I would take lithium any day.
Mhm.
But there's definitely costs with that. So I think you bring up a great point about the size and the weight, and to make sure like I'm connecting the dots on that, since you need basically twice as many AGM and lead acids and they weigh heavier.
They're a
The
lot heavier.
lithium batteries, yeah, when you look up online, I forget what it is. It's like lithium is something like 50 to 70% lighter based on the fact that you need fewer amp hours to get the same
Mhm.
amount of power. And then just flat out 100 amp hour of one compared to 100 amp hour of lithium is lighter itself.
So I replaced 420 amp hours of lithium with 500 amp hours of no, 420 amp hours of AGM with 500 amp hours of lithium, and they were like 30% the weight of the 420 amp hours of lithium and took up a lot less space. Now, this was before the drop-in, like, Battleborn batteries, so this is a whole chunk of 500, so with just one battery management system. That's getting into the weeds, but they are so much lighter. So if weight is a really big concern, that is another reason to go with lithium.
Awesome. Thank you. If anybody has any questions on that, feel free to put it in
Mhm.
chat. Otherwise, I will jump into what Joni was mentioning, charging the batteries, because there's a lot of different ways to charge the batteries, and that can come into account as well, depending on what kind of rig you have. So the first one, the main one that everybody is used to, is shore power or a generator. So you have your plug on the outside of the camper, you plug it into your campsite or your friend's house garage, or you plug it into the generator. All of that is bringing that AC, or that 120 volt is also another name for it, power into your camper to charge your batteries. But that's where it gets to be a little complicated between the AC and the DC power. So when you charge from shore power or a generator, what you're actually doing is you're trying to charge your battery, because your battery is your battery bank to hold the power as you go drive down the road and go camping. So with that AC power coming in, you have to convert it into DC power so your battery can store it. And so that's where what's called a converter comes into place. That converter is converting the AC into DC power. Converters are really common on standard RVs that are manufactured at like an RV dealership. But if you start getting into these more custom rigs, especially a lot of the custom vans, you end up running into inverter/chargers. And so
Mhm.
if you hear charger, that is also the converter. That charger is taking that AC and converting it into the DC to charge your batteries.
I've also heard that called the charge controller, correct?
The charge controller is, yeah, I've heard that
That's the
more
same
with the
thing?
solar. So the
Mhm.
charge controller is, again, converting the solar down into your batteries. But there's so much terminology out there. It could absolutely be called that too. Yeah. And I have Victron components, so I know a lot more of what their nicknames are. But there's a lot of other components out there as well. And so they may be called that as well. Yeah. Yeah. And then in terms of the other methods, thankfully, are all DC. So you don't have to have that conversion, but you do have to have a control to make sure that you don't damage your batteries. So the other options are solar, which is my personal favorite. They charging from your car or your van. So that is called like a DC to DC charger. So it's taking power from your alternator as you drive down the road and it's sending it into your batteries. Same thing as how your car charges as you drive down the road. It's using that power to charge your car battery. You're using that extra power to charge your RV battery. There's also a 7-pin plug. So if you have a trailer, you don't have this in a van, but if you have a trailer or like a truck camper, you plug your 7-pin plug in and it gives you a little bit of power. It is not enough to rely on charging your batteries just off the 7-pin. Some people will try to tell you that. It's just enough. I did have one point with my AGM batteries where I dropped them down to 0 and I had no power. And I woke up in the morning and my 7-pin running my car and the solar was enough to kickstart the batteries.
Oh, great.
Nice. Yeah, it may have been pure luck, but that was nice. But that's the only time I've ever really found the 7-pin to be helpful. You don't get too much off it. So going back to the other ones, so the DC to DC, when I mentioned that you need some sort of controller in order to make sure that it's not overcharging the battery, it's giving the battery the right current. So the DC to DC charger, it would actually connect, the wire would go from your alternator to that charge controller to the battery. Same with your solar. There's a box in between. So it goes solar, charge controller, battery. So there's always something between your charging source and your battery so that it can make sure everything is controlled properly. So it's kind of like the different ways to charge. The other critical thing with batteries is batteries have lithium, AGM, lead acid. They all have their different and their own characteristics. They have certain voltage they want. They have a certain amount of charge they want. They have a certain amount of charge coming in, and then it goes to like a float, it calls. And so all of that needs to be managed somehow. That is a BMS, or a battery management system. So depending on how your setup is, it may be in your batteries. So I have the Battleborns and the BMS is built into them. So I don't need anything like that. But if you do go with a setup where it's like the lithium, I think Jonas might be a little more similar to what you have, but where you have just the batteries, you may have to add that BMS onto it.
Right. Mine is a combination of battery cells and one single BMS for 500 amp hours of lithium.
Perfect.
Versus,
Yeah.
like, say you have 500 amp hours of Battleborn, you're going to have 5 BMSs because each 100 amp hours has its own.
Yep. And so with cold weather, talking about cold weather, that's one of the things that the BMS is responsible for. It keeps an eye and says it's too cold. If you try charging this battery, you're going to damage it. So I'm just shutting it off. You can't charge it. And so it's those kind of things. The BMS basically keeps your batteries healthy.
Right. It also shuts your batteries down if you're getting too low.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. So very, very important.
Yes.
So that's the 4 main ways that you can really charge the battery. And now that you have power in your battery, you've got to be able to get the power out of the battery and into the rig so that you can use it. So if you're using DC appliances, which is really common in vans and rigs, or you're using 12-volt plugs, so USBs, the carports, things like that, it's all 12-volt DC. So that's simple, basic wiring out of the battery. It's pretty straightforward. Where it gets complicated is when you have to do the backwards conversion. So when you have the DC power in your battery, and now you need like a 3-prong outlet for your computer, and you need to go back to your household electrical. So even if you have a blender or a microwave or any of that kind of stuff, you've got to get your DC back into AC. And that is where an inverter comes into play. So inverters, there's a lot of different ways you can go about doing an inverter. There's called a whole house inverter. It's one terminology for it. Basically, that is an inverter that is hooked up into your entire rig. So I have a whole house inverter. So when I turn it on, every single plug in here works. That is a standard household plug. Same one?
Yeah.
Yep. So if you don't use AC power that much, you could actually do a small inverter straight to one plug. So it's a cheaper alternative if you want to do something small. And then you would just have one plug in the camper that would be designated when you're off grid. You can turn on the inverter and run that one. So there's a few different ways you can do it.
Depending on what kind of appliance you're plugging into it.
Yes.
And, yeah.
Yes. Which is, we're not going to get into the math of everything today, but that's also the fun part of these electrical systems is I have a pretty simple setup and everything is pretty basic. So I can do a 2,000 watt inverter and not anything too crazy. But if you're going to be running a residential fridge or huge appliances, things that have a lot of draw, you're going to need bigger inverters.
Yeah.
So they go
For
up.
example, so mine's all electric. I don't have any propane in my van. And so I have an electric water heater that draws a lot of power when it's drying. And then the other thing is I have a Vitamix blender, which is a like 1,800 watt appliance or something like that. So I ended up going with a 2,800 watt inverter just to run my blender.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
I have your smoothies. I have a little tiny Ninja, and it's like a 800 watt blender. So that's why the 2,000 watt inverter is completely fine. Yeah. And then I'm the opposite. I run most off propane. So my heat and my fridge, I'm switching that out. But a lot of the appliances in here are all propane based. So I don't need the cooking, everything like that. I don't need the heavy inverter. Yep.
Yep.
Yep. So that's a good point. If you wanted to do the electric cooktops that are becoming a lot more popular in vans and so forth, you're going to need a bigger battery bank, bigger inverter, things like that in order to accommodate that.
Yeah, no, I do. So because I'm all electric, I do use an induction burner. And the one that I got, I'm able to decrease the wattage before I even turn it on. So it has 3 watt settings. And so I'm able to turn it down on wattage before I even turn it on. And that works great. So it doesn't draw quite so much. And it's pretty easy on the batteries. So someone is asking, can you explain how to calculate what you can run and how long? So amp hours and watts. So maybe even just directing to a resource if you did already say that we're not going to do a lot of math, but if you have some wisdom there.
Yeah, absolutely. So the resource I use for most of my research everything is called Explorist Life. And it's actually a van builder out of Colorado. I think they're near Steamboat Springs, somewhere around there. And so he actually has a site and a YouTube channel, and he does all DIY electrical tips, tricks, know-how, everything. And so if you go to their site, exploristlife.com, they'll kind of walk you through the calculators, how to calculate it, go through all of that. I never actually sat down and did the math because to me, it's very hard to say, okay, I'm going to run this appliance, which is this much wattage for this amount of time during the day. I'm going to need this. So I had a rig and I was converting it, and I kind of did it by trial and error, as well as asking others like, okay, I've got this. What do you recommend I start with? Because the nice thing is a lot of times you can add.
Yeah. And I did put that link in the description for the video. It's already there. There's another good resource for calculating all this, and that's faroutride.com. And I'll add that link to the description too. He has some calculators and some spreadsheets and things. When I was planning my van, I went to the library and checked out a thing called a kilowatt, where you can plug it into your wall and then you plug in your appliance and it will tell you how many watts your appliance is drawing. So if you're really wanting to drill down and be really exact, but remember that you need some buffer. You don't want to go with just the absolute minimum. Even if you're on a budget, it's going to be much cheaper for you in the long run to oversize your system, because there's always going to be something that you're going to add that you hadn't calculate it, or something's going to take more power. Like, so there are things called, there are microwaves that say that they're 700 watt appliances, but when they kick on at 1200 watts, even though they say they're a 700 watt appliance. So, you've got to oversize things a little bit. You don't have to oversize them as much as I did. Mine was a little ridiculous, but yeah, that was crazy.
Yeah. And that's a good point, because it also comes down to how much solar you want versus batteries. So think of your travel style as well, what you like to do. So you may want a bigger battery bank if you do more travel in cloudy areas, or you want to do more winter travel in the snow where your panels might be covered, you don't have as much sunlight. You're going to have a lot more battery power waiting for you. Or if you're going to be in the Southwest for most of the time, Arizona, and you've got sun most of the time, maybe do a much bigger solar array and a smaller battery bank. So there's a few different factors that go into it as well.
Right. And another thing to consider, if you're going to be spending a lot of time in Arizona in the winter, think about how low the sun is in the sky. And maybe, I don't, but maybe consider putting on panels that you can tilt to get a little more solar gain.
Or the deployable. I did the deployable because on mine, I can't tilt them.
Yes.
So I had a deployable, which you do have to run out during the day and chase the sun with it, but it's a lot better for those winter conditions. Right. Yeah.
I am actually thinking about adding a port so that I can plug in deployables into my system for next fall, but we'll see. I have plenty. So we have another question: how to calculate the percent remaining in a battery charge if you only know the amp hours? So, which I think Celia, I think you're confusing terms just a little bit. She says, example, with 13.4 amp hours, what's the 50%? And so the amp hours isn't the 13.4 isn't the amp hours. The amp hours is your total battery, and the 13.4 is the state of charge. So I'll let you.
Yeah, you got it. And the volts conversion to your percentage, I would recommend whatever battery you have, just Google voltage to charge chart and then your battery, because it'll depend again on lithium versus lead acid where that charge is. And then the other thing is, depending on, you can absolutely just run off voltage, or depending on what kind of battery monitor you end up having, it'll have that percent for you. So right now, for example, this is actually set to, I'm at 13.28 volts on my batteries right now. But I can actually switch it over to percentage. So you do have that option too. And the battery monitors aren't actually that expensive compared to everything else. So that might make
if you have a shunt installed. So so you have to have a shunt, which goes, is it the negative side? You've actually installed, so I haven't installed.
It's
but
on the negative side.
It's on the negative side. So it's a little thing that goes in between your battery and, well, you explain it, because I actually haven't installed it.
Let me see if you can actually see all this.
Yeah.
It's hard with so I'm like mid renovation right now. So the wires here are actually coming out of the battery compartment. And so this is that shunt that Joni's talking about. So it's the negative wire that comes into it. The shunt manages all of that. There's a communication wire that comes out of the shunt, and that is what goes up to your battery monitor. And so the shunt is talking to the monitor, telling you. And then the way I wired everything is there's a bus bar, it's basically called here. And I found that makes everything so much easier. It's covered, so it's a little bit harder to see, but it's a lot easier to wire, because then you have a bus bar with a negative side and a positive side. And so when you're reading the manuals of how to install these different things, it's very easy to know exactly where to put things.
Yeah. So it's that shunt that with the communication wire that lets you have a battery monitor that shows you the percentage. When I had my AGM batteries, I did not have a shunt. The guy who installed that didn't believe in them. I don't understand why. And so he was like, you just look at your numbers. And I'm like, I don't understand these numbers. And I didn't understand. I cannot even tell you how many people tried to explain to me what those numbers meant. And then one person finally said, it's a 12-volt system, so you want to be in the 12-volt range. You want to be 12 something or 13 something. You don't want to be below. And it's like, "Oh, okay, that makes sense. It needs to be 12 volts or more." And, lithiums tend to be in the 13 range rather than the 12 range.
Yeah, and mine actually charge at 14.3 or
Mhm.
14.4. So
Right, exactly.
your batteries and the manuals will actually tell you the exact range. But that's to Joni's point, the lithiums can charge faster because they have
Mhm.
that higher voltage. Yeah.
Right, right. And what Cass was saying is to look up the chart for your specific battery so that you know what state of charge you're looking for. We have another question. Adding an additional solar panel, should I increase the inverter to 2,000 watts?
So the solar amount and the inverter don't necessarily need to match, if you want to say. So when
Mhm,
you're adding more solar to your roof, you need to make sure that your solar controller is compatible with the size array you have. So for example, the solar controller I have can only go up to 500 watts. So if I ever want to do more than 500 watts of solar, I need to upgrade that solar controller. So that's what you would want to take into account when you're adding panels. The
mhm.
inverter really is going to end up depending on what appliances you want to use. So
Exactly.
if all you're running is a laptop and that's it, maybe you do a small little one outlet inverter. If, to Joni's point, you're doing like a big microwave or these big Vitamix blenders, things like that, you need to look at what the appliances are. And then you do want to oversize the inverter because of that surge that the appliances require right when they turn on. So it's what you want to run that impacts your inverter.
Mhm. And then another question, if I add another solar panel, do I add more batteries?
Don't you love when people say it depends? It's like the world's
Yes,
worst answer
don't
when you
even
ask a
know.
question. Yeah, it depends. So it's if you want to have more batteries so that you have more power stored.
Mhm,
So with the solar, I'll give you a couple different examples. So my boyfriend had a little casita and he didn't work full time from the road or live full time. He used it to come visit me when I was on the road. So in his little casita, we knew we were going to be there for weekends, mostly hiking, not near the camper. So we had one small battery with like 400 watts of solar on his roof. So that way during the day, we also got a deal on the solar. It was
mhm,
used. So that's why we went that way. But during the day, we didn't have to worry about power in his rig at all. And then the
mhm,
battery was enough to get him through the night. And that was it. That was our only goal. Whereas for me, I have 270 amp hours of batteries and 200 amp hours of solar. So I'm actually heavier on the battery side. But that's because I travel for extended periods of time and I work full time. So if I wake up in the morning and it's raining and it's cloudy, I need to
mhm.
have enough battery bank that I have power stored that I can make it through the entire day. So it's really going to depend on how you want to build your system. The nice thing is batteries are usually a little more restrictive because it depends on where in your rig you can put them. But
Mhm.
solar, you're restricted by the size of your roof, but you can start with 2 panels, extend to 3. And so that's where a little bit of that trial and error comes in as you're experiencing it and learning.
Yeah, and some people say that there's a hard and fast rule about how many solar panels to batteries, and I disagree. I think it depends. As Cass was saying, her boyfriend's rig had 400 watts to 100 amp hours, right?
Yep.
And my van, I have 400 watts to 500 amp hours of battery, and that does really well for me. Because my batteries also charge when I'm driving, and I drive quite a lot. And so, because my battery bank is so large, I am able to store more power than I can make on my roof, but I can fully charge when I'm driving, and then I don't have to worry about whether I have enough solar or not. So, but again, I way oversized my battery bank.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the thing is you'll start talking to some RVers and they'll say how they've got 2,000, 3,000 watts on the roof. They've got 3,000 watts in their rig. It also depends on the size of your rig. So I've got a little truck camper. Joni's
Yes,
in a van.
right.
So these are smaller systems. Those huge systems a lot of times come in when you've got residential fridges, you've got 6 rooms in your fifth wheel, and you have all the appliances, things like that.
Right.
And then it also depends if you, depending on how old your rig is, like this rig is a 2005, it had the old lights in it. It didn't have LEDs. It's a huge battery hog. So that's the kind of thing, switching out to LED lights means I can have less battery because I'm using a lot less power during the day. So it's kind of a balance of everything.
Okay, so we have more questions, but I want to save those a little bit. So if you want to move on to the next part that you wanted to talk about.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks.
Yeah, let me go through my nice little list. Make sure
Perfect.
got everything. Yeah, actually, that's really the basics of an RV system. So from there, those are the big main components when you start talking to an installer about changing things up or to a builder or anything like that. Those are the big ones where you might see a high increase on the different parts. So one thing I do recommend is if you are talking to an installer and they give you a quote, see which parts that they're giving you in there and go ahead and price check different things like that, because some will do, it's normal for them to do a markup on products, but some will do a very, very high markup. So for example, that dealer I went into, it was less than $2,000 in batteries and no additional wiring was required. It was just drop in. They were charging me $6,000 for it. So that's the kind of thing where if you look around and check those things, you can see who might be giving you a good deal and who's not. And then when it comes to the wiring from there, it's pretty similar to a house. You have your panel. So your battery from your inverter or converter, depending on how the setup is, it'll go into that panel. And then from that panel, the wires go out to all of your lights, your appliances, your plugs, things like that. So that's why you always have your fuse box, which is where your blown fuses will be that you have to replace and things like that. So all those different components we talked about end up feeding into that panel in the end, which feeds your appliances.
Yeah. And one thing that is really important if you are putting in a system is to have a main shutoff where you can just shut the whole thing down, just so that you can work on things. That
Yes.
we have a friend who didn't put one in, and that was really hard for her to just, to not be able to work on her stuff because she didn't have a shutoff.
Yeah, that's a great call out, because if you ever want to add one more plug, you just flip it and
Mhm.
you do that.
Yeah.
And with that, if you have solar, a lot of, depending on how they wire it, the solar may or may not go to that main shutoff, because that main shutoff usually is attached to your battery. So you'll want to have a separate shutoff coming off your solar, because in my little Airstream that I had, I did not have that. So if I ever wanted to do electrical work, I had to do it at night when there's no solar coming in. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, great. Um, oh, what was I thinking? Hmm. I don't know, I had a thought in it. So if you're someone who is planning out a brand new van, so you've got an empty shell and you're planning it out, run extra wire, add more plugs than you think you need. The plugs are so cheap compared to everything else. Put more USB ports in than you think you could possibly want, because changing things over to USB charging is a game changer when you're on solar. I didn't have that many things that charged on USB when I started, but I do now. I have a lot of things that charge on USB, and so just, if you have a garage in your van, put an outlet there, put in, just because it's so much easier to do it when you have no walls.
Yes. Yeah.
So, because
And
the
I
wire,
love where
yeah.
your brain's going with these different tips. So this, I have an outlet in a cupboard, and it is
Mhm,
the best thing I ever wired in,
mhm,
because when I want my radios charged, when I want my
mhm,
different GoPro and cameras, I can have them in the cupboard plugged in, and when I'm driving down the road, they're not falling all over the place and they're charging. And so it's
Absolutely.
little things like that. It makes such a difference.
Right.
Yeah.
And figure out where, you're gonna put a router and where you're gonna put, if you're using a WeBoost or any of those things to, kind of put some power in those places. If you don't end up using them, that's fine. That's not a big deal. You aren't out very much money. But if you decide later that you wanna put a router there and you don't have electricity, that's a big problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And you'll be amazed how many appliances actually run off DC now. So my
mhm,
electric toothbrush is a regular household plug. You can buy off Amazon a USB charger for your toothbrush. I used to turn my inverter on just for that. My
mhm,
computer, so Macs are easy because you can get the USB-C plugs.
mhm.
So that's if you want USB and then USB-C.
Yep.
So you can charge like a Mac or so forth. But my work computer is an HP. So again, off Amazon, you can get a DC plug. It's not USB, but it's like the car charger that you have, like the old
Mhm.
cigarette lighter kind of thing. And so I can actually do everything. I even have a DC monitor. So I have a
Nice.
second monitor. And it is a lot more efficient to run everything off DC.
Mhm,
So if you turn your inverter on, there's actually an overhead power draw just to run the inverter as well as convert the DC to the AC. So it's
mhm.
good to only have it on when you use it and then turn it off when you aren't using it in order to save
Right.
power. So
Right.
if you're looking at having like a residential fridge, just keep that in mind. You've got to have an inverter running at all times.
Mhm. And so that leads us to our next question. Starlink needs to be plugged into a battery all the time. Shall I add a smaller inverter that doesn't consume that much battery? Big inverter takes much battery if turned on all the time. Um, and then there's a second part, but let's go with that part first.
So I'm going to cough here in a second.
Mhm,
um, So that's actually a great question. And I'm going to start experimenting with that soon. So
mhm,
Starlink does run off like a regular outlet, and you can do the whole house or the smaller one, like you're saying. The smaller one absolutely could be more efficient. There are now out there converters to get Starlink to run off DC. It
mhm.
requires some wiring, some components. I think it's a few $100s in components, so it's not the cheapest, but compared to Starlink, it's not the most expensive either. So there's a few different options out there. I don't know numbers or anything off the top of my head yet because I haven't experimented with it. So that is something I'm going to be looking into in the future.
I just saw a kit today on Etsy for about 270 something for the converter kit. Another, recommendation, though, is to go to a different router that's more that's more robust than the router that comes with the Starlink that runs off of 12 volt. And that all will probably be cheaper for you than adding another smaller inverter and all of that stuff. So and more convenient. And especially if you get a different router that not that the different routers can be a more expensive way to go, but it's also more efficient and stronger.
Yeah, there's a gentleman on YouTube, and I can't remember his channel, but that's the video I actually have saved for when I
Mm,
want to try that. In the router, it's a small little router like this, super efficient. It sips off the batteries. And so
mm,
running Starlink, he was actually doing the battery test with having it run off Starlink off DC, and it was incredible the difference between the regular router. Yeah,
nice. I'd love to see that video if you can share that.
I will share.
And
Yeah.
she also asks, "Is there a way to connect 2 inverters with 1 lithium battery?" And I'm not sure if that might be beyond the scope of our
I would be curious why. So if you're thinking of doing like two small inverters for two outlets versus a big whole house inverter, it comes
Mhm,
down to your wiring. So I think my biggest question would be why you want to do two. Because if you wanted to do, let's say, one small inverter, depending on the size of the inverter, you could do one outlet, you could do two outlets. So if you're
mhm,
trying to just do it for the different outlets, you might be able to do it with the one.
gotcha. And, one thing that we didn't mention that is probably important to know A couple of things actually. If your rig is older and has a flooded lead acid battery, you have to add distilled water to those batteries. You can't let them go dry. They also need venting. So just know that. I'm not going to go into it. Just know that. Know your batteries and how you have to take care of them. Um, Another thing is that if you're adding batteries to your bank, they need to be the same size, not physical size, but amp hour size that to the ones that are already existing, because your whole bank is going to go to the lowest common denominator. So if you have two 100 amp hour batteries and you add a 200 amp hour battery, that 200 amp hour battery is just going to act like another 100 because it's going to go to the lowest common denominator. So just some caveats there of things that most people don't ever talk about, and it's not something that you would know, and it's, it's important.
It's, yeah, very, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's important on the venting too, because you'll see that the outside containers, or if they're inside, there's vents all over the place, where you don't have to do that with lithium. You can put it into a cabinet inside and be fine with it. Yep. There's also, if you do go down the road of installing, you'll see on the different components, make sure you look into the components specifically, because they're all a little particular in what they want to. So like
absolutely,
the inverter charger wants to be near the battery, but can't be right above a lead acid because you can't be venting into it. So it's got to be like somewhat offset. All of that stuff is out there when you start actually doing. If you want to do that, where your installer will know that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of little nuances. Yeah.
There are a lot of little pieces that you do need to understand, but we wanted to provide an overview of electrical for everybody. So even if you're not installing, if you just have a rig, these are some things that you need to know. We do have a question: can you mix lithium and AGM? And no.
No, it's type. Yeah.
No.
And that comes down to that comes down to a lot of things, but the big thing is your components. So that converter, which is converting the AC into the DC power, it's got to know what battery type you have. And so your converter has to be compatible with whatever your battery is. So it's important if you have an old rig and they say you've got drop-in lithiums. Well, a drop-in lithium only works if your converter and all of your electrical is compatible with the lithium. So lithiums require slightly larger wires, they require a different converter, things like that. So it's not necessarily quite as easy, especially with older rigs. Newer are very different because lithium's becoming so commonplace. So you gotta make sure all that works together.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions? And Ian mentioned Fit RV. I'm not sure what that's in reference to. Is that we know Fit RV people. I think we know that channel, but I don't know what the reference was.
I'm not sure.
If leaving RV at storage, indoor or outdoor, shall I turn off the lithium battery using the kill all switch?
So there's a lot of different preferences on how you store. So with your acid lithium, so we'll get there in a second, with like the lead acid and the AGM, you usually want to have it on a trickle charge, because if you get below the 50%, you're in trouble. And so if you turn off the kill switch, your battery is not necessarily going to stay 100% the whole entire time. So for those, you really do want to trickle charge. For the lithium, it holds it a lot better. So it depends on how long you're going to store it for. So I know for myself, if I'm storing it for a few weeks, a month or two, I will turn off the kill switch if it's in the summer. But when it's in the winter, things like that, I want to keep power running through here because I'll actually run my heat. So it kind of comes down to how you're going to store it, sort of thing. But lithium is a lot easier to actually turn that off and leave it than the lead acid and AGM. But at the same point, if you're going to store it for years and years and years, just know that your batteries might need a little more care other than just shutting it down.
Gotcha. Thank you, and I wouldn't know that because I don't store my van. Yeah, so Ian says that, Fit RV is a YouTube channel who did a lot of discussions about running Starlink. Great.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Excellent. All right, last call for questions. And Cass, this has just been such a fantastic overview. This is really great.
Thank you.
In fact, I'll highlight a comment here. She says, fabulous overview. I'm so grateful. Each time I listen to more, it helps me understand better. And yes, I feel like each time, everyone explains it just a little bit differently. And so you get little angles to figure it out in your brain.
And I'm a very visual learner. So the biggest thing that helped me is wiring diagrams, because you can actually trace it and see. You're like, okay, it's coming in from the shore power. It's coming here to the inverter charger converter, and it's going to the battery. So for me, that visual, if you just look up Explorer's Life, has the wiring diagrams. That's actually what I've built all these rigs off of, or any RV wiring diagram. It kind of helps to piece it all together too.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. All right. This has been fantastic. I love it. So,
Well, thank you everybody for joining. Really appreciate it.
And Cass, thanks so much for coming on and sharing what you've learned in such a clear way. This has been great. If this video was helpful, please share it and leave a comment with other tips and what idea you have found most helpful. And until next week, enjoy your journey.